Hello, this is Greg. I got Hugh Squire here with me again today. We're just having our regular conversation. We talk about all kinds of things. It's amazing what's going on in the world. But this today, 11/19, is an important day, and it's the anniversary of the murder of Jaleayah Davis that I have a series on Bow and Arrow on YouTube. But what it also is, and I did not realize this till I was looking in the news today, and how I didn't find this before is amazing. But this is the anniversary of the Gettysburg Address, 11/19/1863. And by the way, it was 1963 when Kennedy was assassinated. So we're talking about, right? Did I get that right? Yeah, 1963.
Yeah, 63 in November. That's correct.
Yeah, in November. Okay. So how is that? How does all this go together? Well, my last video about Jaleayah Davis is that we think that there may be a racial component to these murders, and it's sounded more and more likely. And what's also interesting historically is that President James Garfield, who was born 11/19, so this would be the anniversary of his birth in 1831. Well, guess when he died? James Garfield died in 1881, and the place where Jaleayah Davis was murdered was mile marker 181, where the podcaster Emily Nestor has been talking about her has made a podcast by the name of mile marker 181 in a regular series, and they're missing some pretty serious important parts of history that all seem to be coming into focus here, and instead they just criticized me for trying to indicate that there's something to this. There's more than they're revealing. Maybe they don't know. I don't know. Now, it's also interesting that Terry Davis, the computer programmer, died in 8/11/18. So there's another 181. And Deborah Davis, who was Whitey Bulger's girlfriend, I believe, died in 1981.
Wow, that's interesting. Whitey Bulger, huh?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Whitey sold me a car, and then the FBI arrested me for Jimmy Hoffa's murder because Whitey sold me a car. That's interesting.
Yeah. A guy named Whitey, which sounds like a racial name almost in and of itself, and then you have a Davis. That's weird. There's just so many racial components to this. And then there's that Cindy Ball who was murdered, and they were both last seen on the same road, which is called Rosemar Road, not long before each one of them were murdered. What are the chances of that? And then how Cindy Ball, her murders, had all kinds of 214 connections. And I was just looking up a bunch of 214 things here a minute ago. Let me see if I see what did I do with those. Oh, I just hit the wrong button. So we'll pull up my 214 document here. Yeah, Gettysburg Address equals 214. Cersei Kennedy, 214. Okay, so she was murdered here recently. Sugar Camp Road, where Cindy Ball was found dead, 214.
Oh, Greg, my 124 or 214. We compared my wife's murders to those murders, and they all come up 9/11 and 214 or 124.
Isn't that crazy? See, that's freaking insane. There's no possible way, Hugh, that this
And I rented a house from the Ball family.
Yeah.
30 minutes away. Yeah. As my wife would remember, as my wife was murdered in 2011, same year.
And then not only was Jaleayah Davis murdered, we had Maleah Davis murdered and found on the side of the road too. And both of them were black. How is this possible? There's no way this is all coincidence. Either the world is completely fictitious or these things are designed. I mean,
no, it's not fictitious.
Yeah.
It all fits in with my own wife's murders, 4 of my wife's murders, and even my murdered attorney, Mr. Bauman, the Maleah and Jaleayah Davis, and then I owned a Civil War farm, the Battle of Blue Springs.
Exactly. You owned the place where it was the turning point of several states in the war.
Yeah, it was a turning point of the Civil War. It was the Battle of Blue Springs is where the North turned the South back, and then the South never recovered.
Yeah,
I owned the back of the
Civil War there. There's no way this is not connected.
And they still reenact the Civil War, and they still have the mentality of they're still fighting the Civil War in the South. So, and these are 2 half black, half white girls who were murdered. as
Yeah,
my
well,
wife.
Maleah was completely black, I believe. Jaleayah was mixed race.
Yeah. And I have half black people in my family, and the one little girl was it Jaleayah or Maleah? She was murdered in April, and my own niece is half black, and her name is April.
Yeah,
And this is not as my wife is murdered on a Civil War farm.
yeah. The date was 5/4/19 that Maleah was murdered, and the days left in the year 2/14.
Yeah, so these all look like they're Civil War and racist oriented murders.
And it's
All the way down to the Ball farm that I had purchased from David and Tammy Ball. Now, I don't know how they're related to Cindy Ball, but I know that they are. It's the same area. It's
they
30
have to be.
minutes away.
Yeah, they have to be. And this is why that gematria doesn't do any good if we're not using to figure out who and why. This is showing an obvious racial component, a Civil War connection, a connection to your story. And if all we did was just punch numbers and say they agree, somebody might say, "Oh, well, the Illuminati or the Freemasons did it," and they're just going to leave it at that.
Well, I'm here to say that your calculator's working, and I know this because I've been surrounded by the murders of women and children since 1953.
Yeah,
And,
exactly.
and the Hall family kidnapped me in 57. And then you had mentioned to me about Manly P. Hall. What was that you had said about Manly P. Hall?
Manly P. Hall wrote that. Not it wasn't Morals and Dogmas. It was. I have it upstairs. I don't have it with me. Dad Vernon, I forgot the name of it, but he wrote that important book that Zach Hubbard, that started the Gematria channel. He's the one that said that he used his book to discover Gematria originally because Manly P. Hall wrote about Gematria in that book, and so I
Yeah,
bought it because he's talking about it.
yeah. And then the Hall family kidnapped me at the age of 4
Daryl Hall, the
with
singer.
5 governors.
Yeah,
Yeah, with 5 governors on the day Admiral Byrd died.
good
And then
chances. Daryl Hall, the singer.
Manly P. Hall was into like witchcraft or the occult.
Yeah, not witchcraft, but yeah, he was like a mystic guy. He understood the
Into the
symbols
mystery.
and
Yeah,
mystery.
well, right now, 60 years after that fact of Hall kidnapping me and murdering kids, and the world got Daryl's TV in Pennsylvania. Now, the people that murdered my wives and my attorney are from Pennsylvania. Garrett, Osborne, all the way back in the 1600s with my family in Pennsylvania before the United States was a state. Was a union of states. This is before we defeated King George. And I'm still being attacked by those same families, Garrett and Osborne and Hall and Wallace and Long. And all these people became governors, but they're killing kids all around me in Oakland County. And then they killed the president. They killed JFK, and I'm the truth of that.
And everybody, if they don't know the name Hall, they know the name Osborne. They know
Yeah.
the rock and roller.
Well, in Detroit, the Osborne family still runs the largest radio news talk show on earth, Maria Osborne, and she'll introduce Gordon Guy. And
Marie Osborne is the one on TV doing the diet commercials, isn't she?
Yeah, all kinds of things. The Osborne families all over the country, and that's the governor of Michigan that kidnapped me and tortured me in his
And it's
basement.
amazing how much they've marked that name in the media. I mean, Spider-Man's enemy is Osborne. You got the Wizard of Oz. I mean,
Yeah, Ozzie and
goes back
Harriet.
really far.
Ozzie and Harriet. Yes, that's correct, Greg.
Yeah,
And
even
my
like
family made
Dr. Oz.
Yeah, my family made the very first TV series before that. The Gardner family made Make Room for Daddy.
Yeah.
And then you got Ozzie and Harriet, and then Ricky Nelson, and then Leave It to Beaver. When I escaped those governors, they gave you Leave It to Beaver.
Yeah.
And that's not coincidence.
This stuff all goes together in a way that has to be planned and designed, whether it's these.
Yeah, it was planned and designed, and I knew that when I was kidnapped at 4 because the people that kidnapped me were smart, and they deliberately kidnapped me at 4, and they murdered Admiral Byrd on that same day I was kidnapped. All of that was by design.
They seem to be putting together like the entire way that history is going to unfold. I don't, you mentioned there might be college deans doing this, but They're making it look like it's Illuminati and Freemasons with their numbers, so they're blaming the wrong people.
No, it's not Illuminati. It's not the people that created this country.
Right.
Osborne came from London, even Ozzy Osbourne, and that's part of my torture.
Right.
That's mental torture all my life.
That's huge. That's a huge revelation, Hugh, because what you're actually saying, and people don't understand, is when they're blaming the Freemasons for everything, is they're blaming the people who founded the country rather than the people that we kicked out of our country.
Right. And it is, we're being attacked. Us as Americans, as a free country, we're being attacked from outside our country.
Mm-hmm.
And we're being attacked daily right now, and people just don't. You're oblivious to it because you're not in you're not in the service. You're not a what do you call that? Not a Navy SEAL, but like my friend Mr. Butler, Smedley Butler's kid, special services. If you're special services in the military, you know the things I'm talking about. So I'm sorry to interrupt you there, Greg, but it's real important that your calculator you're using was created, what, 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah, something like that.
And it's based on Manly P. Hall, the very family that kidnapped me in '53.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that speaks volumes to me because I've known all along that they were following a plan. And plans are mathematical and they're well thought out, and they're planned in colleges like the Continental Divide is Johnson Road, and Johnson was Kennedy's vice president and took over as president as they murdered Kennedy. And then the next exit is 357, and that's what they killed Oswald with. So that's all planned out in colleges, and it's mathematical.
And both presidents 100 years apart had a Johnson follow them. What are the chances of that? I mean, this has to be.
No, that was planned in a college, Greg.
Yeah. And like you said, Johnson's the Continental Divide, It's okay, I get it.
And then you said something about Kennedy. Kennedy was murdered in '63. And then here's my stolen trademark, bottom line with a red line under it to Obama. He always said that he's going to draw a red line in the sand. Well, I'm the line. That's my stolen trademark. And it was stolen by Kennedy's press secretary who wrote 7 Days in May. And you put his name in a gematria calculator, and what'd you come up with?
Yeah, 63. What are the chances of that?
Yeah, and then Major
was murdered. There's no way that's a coincidence.
Yeah, and then Major Tom Garrett murdered my attorney, and we put that woman's murder and my attorney's murder in, and we come up with 9/11, 124, and it's just unbelievable. The calculator works, and all of this is being done by design.
Yeah.
But we're not trying to discredit the calculator. We're trying to tell you, Manly P. Hall was into this with the occultism, and I was kidnapped by forces outside of this country, coming from London and Germany and France, and they've been killing American kids.
Right.
And the Davis girls, they're part of that. Write their names on the board behind you there, Greg. That was just. And let me tell you how I know.
The names of the girls that were killed?
Yeah.
It's Maleah Davis.
Right.
And Jaleayah.
And I believe that's Meleah.
Yep.
H, right?
Yep, spelled just a little bit different. Male.
Is it spelled different? Because the news articles I looked in weren't.
Yeah, Leah for Maleah, and you were talking about Leah.
Yeah, Leah and Leah down below.
Right.
And then square off the JA and the MA. JA is Obama talking about Janet Yellen, and my secretary was Janet Barclay as they murdered Kiki Nelson.
And one of Obama's kids was Maleah.
Yeah, and Janet was old enough to be my mother. There's Ma and Janet. And then Leah is my cousin, and she and her husband owned the largest jewelry store on earth. It was called Merlite. And then you go to the word Davis, underline Davis. There's two names, Davis, and that's Jefferson Davis. And then the other girl murdered. The other girl murdered in the same area. What was her name?
Yeah, that was her name's different. She was Cindy Ball.
Yeah, and I rented a farm from of the Ball family before I rented the Manning Ranch, and they murdered Kiki when I was renting from Ball.
JD Jefferson Davis.
Yeah, and I grew up with JD, and Jefferson Davis was the Southern Army, Southern President, Southern Army.
Right.
And I lived by with Cindy Ball, and the Ball family wrote writing with Private Malone, and this is when George Little was in the Pentagon still.
Yeah.
And I had bought George a white Corvette, and Prince, who is my cousin in New York, where I own Bottom Line, New York, he was singing, "Give me a white Corvette." He was singing right to me. And
Okay.
all of this is related to the
Well,
Civil War.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Now, see, all this makes a lot more sense than when I first started, and I feel bad a little bit because before I met you, all I knew was what they were saying on Gematria Effect News, that everything's related to the Freemasons. So when I was trying to expose this, I could see the patterns through the Gematrinator, but I couldn't see who was actually responsible and what the real story
Now,
was about.
now the farm I lived on that I purchased from the Manning family after I moved out of the home that I purchased from Ball, I moved on to Manning's ranch, and Manning co-created the JFK archives. And that ranch was the Civil War, the Battle of Blue Springs. 30 acres is next to Walmart and Midway, Tennessee. And that was the turning point of the Civil War. And the girl they murdered there was Terry Heath. Now that's Sarah Palin's family, and John McCain and Sarah Heath Palin were running to be president. And it goes even deeper than this, that before that, I rented a home from the very tax firm that does Donald Trump's taxes, the Mazar LLP firm, rented me a house where my 7-year-old daughter was kidnapped, and Kiki was chained to a tree and raped, while was Sylvester Stallone's wife. Sylvester Stallone is from Ukraine, and Natalie Wood was murdered at that time. And all these things are about the Ukraine, are about Jefferson Davis and the Civil War. The Manning Ranch is the largest ranch of the Battle of Blue Springs, and they murdered McCain's running mate, his family, on the farm I bought for her, and it's the Battle of Blue Springs. And she was married to the only living Civil War soldier still on Earth.
Yeah, I was going to get that. So to explain that to people, that when you were younger, this was what, in the '60s. She was a lot younger than you, right?
Well,
She was,
she was 3 years older than me.
or yeah, I'm getting it
When
backwards.
she
Okay,
was
so
18, she married the only living Civil War soldier on Earth and had his son.
and he was really old, which is
And
weird, but it happened. It's true.
no, she was 18, and she was working for Ronald Reagan, and she created the Head Start program for
And
Ronald
she's
Reagan.
got pictures. You're not just making this up. I've seen the
No,
pictures.
this is true.
I know. I've seen
And
the
she's
pictures.
buried next to the King family in Wisconsin, where two policemen, they kidnapped her out of her CPS and Head Start office illegally. They weren't on duty. They picked her up, put her in a patrol car, and drove her across 3 states while she was protecting little kids from pedophiles on the Great Lakes. And I was kidnapped by 5 governors in Michigan across the way, and they were killing kids in Oakland County. Terry was on the other side of the Great Lakes, running CPS and Head Start in Wisconsin. And she had Ronald Reagan, when he was president, he had held her up as a role model for Head Start. Gave her a medal, gave her awards for creating that program back in the 60s. I moved her on a farm. She called me from Ohio after 2 policemen kidnapped her right out of her office. Drove her all the way to Iowa from Wisconsin. She escaped them, called me and asked me to help her. I bought her the Manning Ranch. And at that time, Manning, when you heard Manning, all you thought about was Manning co-created the JFK archives with Kennedy.
Yeah, or you looked it up and looked all the Civil War.
While she was on that Civil War ranch, Garrett destroyed my income, helped murder my attorney and my wives, Terry Heath and Victoria Maleah, and he was a journalist in the White House. And he was sending me computers from the FBI with Clinton's emails on them.
But to hide this whole Manning name and the Manning Ranch and the Manning archives and all this, instead the media brings you the story of a queer in the military, Chelsea
Right,
Manning.
right.
Just so when you Google Manning or something, that's what comes up. And so
Yeah,
you
you
don't even
don't
know
see
about the war
JFK
battle.
anymore.
You don't know about the JFK part of it. It's just all a big bunch of confusion to anybody that tries to look it up now.
Now you see the gay community that kidnapped me in '53.
Yeah,
That's absolutely right. And they murdered Admiral Byrd.
yeah.
And they cut
And they
my
covered
father's
it up
hand.
with a
They
story
cut my
about a queer.
father's hand off. And my father served with Kennedy in the Navy in World War II. So did my wife's father. They all served with Kennedy in the Navy. And then my own cousin piloted the Enterprise during the Vietnam War.
Yeah, is
Just like
everybody
your,
hearing this? I mean, folks, are you
just like
putting
your
it together?
brother, just like your brother piloted the ship in the Middle East. Which one was that?
Well, no, he didn't pilot it. He was on it. But yeah, he,
Which
he
ship
was on
was
the USS Cole.
it? Yeah, the USS Cole. And in my town, Coleman Young was mayor, and he beat my next door neighbor, Nichols. And then Nichols and McVeigh lived next door to me for 20 years in 3 different cities. They keep moving next door to me, the Nichols family. The Nichols are the Indian. What's on a nickel? It's the buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
My family is Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, Jackson, Grant, Hamilton. Those are my family members on your money. A nickel, that's the chief of the Indians. And the Nickel family keeps moving next to me,
Mm-hmm.
protecting me, I think.
It's interesting. And to cover up what Nichols and McVeigh were doing on your property, they ended up creating the Oklahoma
Oklahoma
bomb.
bombing. Oklahoma bombing in a Ryder truck. And Mitch Ryder is my brother-in-law, and he was writing the music for Elvis in Vegas the day I was born, in Royal Oak. And
See,
then
the biggest complaint I always have is how can you have all these connections? Well, listen to his story and they start to make sense when you put it all together, where he lived and what they're doing and why, and the Oakland County murders and the Osbornes and the Halls. These are famous
yeah,
names.
my uncle Bucky Fuller owns the patent for the GM van. I mean, think about that. He owns the patent for all the vans on Earth. Buckminster Fuller, that's my uncle. He was making the geodesic domes at the World Fair the day I was born.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just related to all these people via my family members.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't ask to be born into this mess. I was kidnapped by 5 governors at birth. There's no lie in that. They murdered my twin. My doctor, the doctor that my mother's doctor was Dr. Barker, and the whole world got Bob Barker, my doctor, on The Price is Right. And
Yeah,
that's
and who were all these people that were abducting you? Well, they were children of governors, were descendants of governors. They were names that were foreign and British, like Osborne, and they were obviously a gay agenda all the way back here in the 50s that was already starting to sink its teeth into this country, even back then. I mean, obviously, if you're raping little boys, you're part of a gay agenda. So, in case anybody didn't put that together, I mean, that's crazy. How long this agenda's been going on?
It's been going on all the way back to Lincoln. My great-great-grandmother was sitting with Lincoln as his guest in Ford Theater. When I was born and they killed Kennedy,
Mm-hmm.
my own family was running Ford Mansion in Dearborn.
Yeah.
So it's the same players 100 years apart,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the same families. And all these families, Osborne and Garrett, and my family, Harris and Jefferson, they were all in Pennsylvania back in the 1600s in the colonies. It wasn't even America yet.
Yeah, this is an old story, and once you start putting all the pieces together, it starts to make a lot of sense.
Yeah, well,
And this
Albert
isn't
Pike was
too
one of
crazy
my
that
great
people can't
uncles.
understand it. You just have to take the time to learn it.
The
And that's
reason I knew to tell you Jefferson Davis in that area is because Albert Pike is one of my uncles. He's one of my
exactly,
great
exactly.
uncles, and he was head of the KKK. My own mother was racist. I had many black friends. I lived with Michael Jackson's family. They gave me the key to Epstein's house after I rented the house. I rented a huge farm from Mazar LLP. in Utica, Michigan, as they made Back to the Future. That's the Twin Pines and the 9/11 clock break. That's the connection to Epstein and Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Mazar. And I rented a great big farm from Rosario. And he's
Yeah, so
dead
that
now.
whole Twins Pines things, you see all these videos about decoding 9/11 and Back to the Future and everything. And you just mentioned Twin Pines, which is on the Back to the Future movie.
Yeah, well,
Part of
that
the
I
sequel.
grew up there with Milky the Clown. That's Claire Cummins. And my family made all the Fuller transmissions in a
Explain
semi.
the Twins Pine thing.
Pardon?
Explain the Twin Pines
Well,
thing.
that was Twin Pines Dairy with Elsie and Borden Milk. And
Okay.
before me and my mother's generation, you had Lizzie Borden. That's
Yeah,
Borden Milk.
Borden
And
Milk,
there
yeah.
was a song about that, Lizzie Borden, and she killed her own mother and sister or something. Whack, 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 20 whacks or something. My mother's generation would sing that song about Lizzie Borden. In my generation, it became Borden's Dairy.
And we know the people who made that movie Back to the Future understand all these connections because they put 9/11 all over that movie, not just the Twin Pines that's connected, but they even put the number 9/11 over and over again.
No, they used my name, Huey Lewis. That's not his name. I'm Huey. They
Yeah,
stole
the
my
music
birthday.
in it, yeah, was from Huey.
You know, his name is not Huey, and he came from France. He's not an American. He came from France.
Yeah, that was the music in the
Yeah,
Back to the
and
Future
I was
movie.
kidnapped by people from Britain. Osborne's from Britain. Ozzy Osbourne's from Britain. They kidnapped, tortured me, and murdered kids across the street. Governor Osborne, that's his family from Britain. And I say this stuff and people think I'm crazy, and I'm not. I'm telling you the real history of Michigan and your country.
Yeah, and I feel like we just proved that it's connected to all this stuff together, that it's weaved together, that somebody intelligently had to put it together. And there's no possible way we can just be talking out of our butts here. That somebody had to intelligently.
Well, here's what I'll say, Greg, is I see so many murders daily. I just posted some about in the Duncan at the Duncan Walmart, and when Kennedy was killed in '63, they murdered 5 Duncan kids next door to my family's farm. And at the very same time, they murdered Kennedy, and then they covered it up and said all the kids ate rat poison, and they did it on purpose. And this is a big lie. That the Duncan family is who Johnson called the next week to take the heat off of him when they started saying that he was part of the murder. So then he calls up the 5 Duncan kids in New Haven, Michigan, next door to my dad's family's farm, and that got the heat off of him, talking about 5 dead kids. The poor kids ate arsenic, and then in my family, Agatha Christie is my aunt. Arsenic and old lace, and this is the con coming from Britain.
And you just found arsenic in your water here a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I was just fed something in my water. That's correct, Greg. And I've been fighting these people all my life. And you know me, Greg. You know I got a murder a day thrown in my lap. And it's been going on for 66 years. And it's the press. It's people like Anderson Cooper and Elon Musk.
Well, okay, explain the Anderson Cooper thing.
Anderson kidnapped me. Anderson kidnapped me with Wallace Long, Osborne, and Hall. All the way back in '53. Anderson was one of my kidnappers. And he was also the warden where my uncle was put in prison for shooting a guy on the day I was kidnapped.
So we had both Andersons and Coopers who were rapists back in '57. And now we have an Anderson Cooper on CNN. Isn't that crazy? And then
that goes so far. That goes so far. The Anderson family plays Batgirl. Osborne bit the head off a bat. All that's interrelated. Anderson was at my wedding. My girlfriend was Sandra Locke. Anderson changed her name to Sandra Locke and then went with Eastwood and Carmel. I dated Sandra Locke with Carmela Fox in Warren, Michigan.
Then Osborne is Spider-Man's enemy.
Yeah.
And Anderson.
Well, Sandra Locke and Carmela Fox lived on Chicago Road. Spider-Man climbed the Sears Tower on your way to Chicago. And I was there when he did it.
And they put Anderson in the Matrix.
Right. Anderson. And I'm the Smith family. They made my family out to be the bad guy, and Anderson's the good guy. And this is the con in America.
Yeah.
Everything is the reverse of what they're showing you in the movies and The people making the movies and running the news are the very people that killed the kids in Oakland County and murdered your president. And I'm the truth of that. And that's why nobody will interview me, Greg.
And then they put your name itself right there on the Harry Potter movie.
Yeah, they put me right out in the middle.
Right there on the big tower.
They're hiding me right in plain sight. It's never me. I'm never in the movies, but it's always my name, my trademark, my life, and it's always in all the movies. But I don't exist. And all that comes from the very same, like when I was kidnapped, L. Brooks Patterson covered it up. L. Brooks Patterson's kid, Ted Oglesby, was my good friend. We went to school together. They found him at 15 or 16, hung in an Oakland County jail. And there was no reason. I was with him the night before he got put in jail, and he wasn't doing nothing wrong. They murdered him there. They probably murdered him because he knew me, and they were afraid he'd say, well, my dad knows who the Oakland County child killer is, because I knew. I escaped him. And they murdered my twin and dumped his body in Pennsylvania. There's no record of this because L. Brooks Patterson, he was sitting outside in a police car with an Oakland County cop in 1957 when I escaped them, and they were sitting outside of the governor's home laughing and joking about it, drinking, on duty drinking. And then Anderson, one of the guys that kidnapped me, became the warden of Marquette State Prison over my uncle. And this is what L. Brooks Patterson spent his lifetime hiding with the Oakland County and the Warren Police Department, Detective Akers. L. Brooks Patterson, Hackle and Macomb County murdered a judge. He murdered Hunter D. Stair and Dr. James Brandenburg. And I'm the only guy on earth that knows this truth, other than the sheriffs that murdered him. And another state cop murdered Jimmy Hoffa. And I know this for a fact. I'm not a pipe dream. I lived this. And the FBI, if I call them, they hang up on me. But yet they detained me the day Hoffa disappeared.
Because again, Osborne is running the FBI. The Osborne family.
Yeah, the Osborne family, that's correct. They run the FBI and they make the stories. And the murders that you just put together, I don't know. Jaleayah Davis and Maleah Davis and Cindy Ball, that could be the FBI just playing with me and making up fake stories. I don't even know if those people were really murdered, but they're all murdered on a highway that marks me 30 minutes from my home or four of my life.
They're definitely murdered. There's no doubt about that. I mean, these are real people that are known in this community. So
but that's not okay. But what I'm saying, Greg, is that's not always the case. I've caught Osborne, the FBI, and the police. They put fake murders in too.
Oh yeah.
They do it to manipulate the public.
I made an interesting video one time about an obviously fake news story right here in Ohio, where they took a picture of Edward Snowden and they photocopied his face, gave him some other name that was just barely different than Snowden, and said he was about to shoot a synagogue in Ohio. It was so obviously fake that any moron should have been able to see it.
Yeah, the people that killed Kennedy, they have distorted our laws and our civil rights to the point where they can come into your house, rip your house apart without a warrant, and then pretend that they were a burglar, and then they can write a fake story and say somebody was murdered there.
Mm-hmm.
You don't
and
know.
They do it all the time. So
and you don't know what's true and what's not true. And then when you report something and go onto the station and talk to a detective, they'll look at you and smile and they say, no, it didn't happen there on that block. It happened in another state. Mm-hmm. And they smile at you with this dirty little smile like they got something over you. And a lot of these murders, the police are behind them.
Exactly.
And you know that,
and in
right?
the case of Jaleayah Davis, a whole lot of these people were related to police. And I have a strong feeling that there's a connection there with the police.
Well, when my wife was murdered 30 minutes away on a Manning farm, on a Civil War farm, policemen came to my house because Tom Garrett had sent me Clinton's computers right from FBI. It was stamped FBI, top security on them. He sent me boxes of these hard drives and computers. And then they murdered my wife. And then my home was broken into, and every time they broke into my home, they didn't touch nothing but the computers, and they took the hard drives and smashed them with hammers. And this is 30 minutes from the murders you're talking about. And I know these things happen, but the police that come out and made reports, they gave me fake badge numbers, fake names, and then they lost a stack of police records this tall in Mosheim and Greenville, Tennessee. And the whole police force went to jail 2 years later for selling drugs. And as they went to jail, they destroyed all the records to the murders of my wife, to Terry Heath, Palin's family. John McCain and Palin were running to be vice president. And they hid all the evidence to Garrett sending me FBI computers with Clinton's emails on them as they were investigating Clinton, and Obama was still president in 2011. Remember? This is the cover up, and I'm right at the center of it, Greg. And
oh,
then,
and who was Obama's kid? Maleah.
yeah, and Leah's my cousin. That's my cousin's wife, and she owned Merlite jewelry before you were born, Greg. Biggest jewelry. It was costume jewelry, but they sold more than anybody on earth.
Wow.
This is the con, Greg.
Well, Hugh, this is such important information, and it's so much to digest.
Oh, there's so much more than that.
Oh, yeah, like there'd be 1,000 books that could be written on it. I think
I have a murder a day, and when I say a murder a day, I have entire ferry boats with 1,500 people on them capsized because I start to say truth, and there's no lie in that. 9/11, you know, Greg, George Bush used me as ground zero on 9/11. As George Bush and his friends sold the very people a restaurant who he blamed on worldwide TV. He blamed them for funding the Muslims, and then he sold that very little Muslim kid a restaurant on Olson Street as they murdered Terry Heath Olson, my fiance, on the Manning Ranch. And all they got to do is go to Detroit on Groesbeck to Olson Street, and there's this little chicken place owned by Ronnie Carmo, and that's the little Muslim kid the Bush family blamed for 9/11. And he had nothing to do with it.
it's insane.
He went to Christian church with me. He went to my church with me. He had nothing to do with it. Yet George Bush on 9/11 said my name, said my structures are collapsing, and he was referring to bottom line.
Yeah. Sometimes
And
if
then
anybody's listening to this, they should go back and look at the
and
George
even
Bush
Trump is saying bottom line. And then Trump, the people that do his taxes, rented me a house in 1979.
Yeah, George Bush accidentally gives Hughes structures are falling down instead of huge, and then he corrects himself. It says huge.
And this is in Greg, this is in everything since all the way back to 1953. And before that, it fell on my mother's and her family's shoulders with the murder of Lincoln at Ford Theater. My mother's family owned Harris Publications. That's the largest magazine publisher on earth. They own Life, Look, Business Week, People magazine. They put the Pope on the cover.
I think we've given enough information to prove that all these stories here, all these stuff about Maleah and Jaleayah and all this, and all these things you're connected, they're all connected somehow.
They're all interconnected.
They're all interconnected.
And it's murder. These are murders, Greg.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the people in power doing it. It's our servants doing it, and they've got such blinders on everybody. And me, they won't give me 5 minutes on TV or radio.
And then if we're not careful, gematria is going to be just more disinformation, just like Alex Jones. It's just going to turn into more disinformation where people are not going to be able to find the truth if they don't actually look for the actual answers.
And that's why you're mad at the guy that created that gematria calculator and taught you, is because he takes information the gematria calculator's saying, and then he doesn't say, well, what does it mean?
And ends up blaming the very people that are the opposite, the antithesis of all this, the people who
right, exactly, yeah. And so he's like a disinfo campaign, and I don't think
at the end of the day he's not being any better than Alex Jones if he doesn't.
Yeah, I don't know. These guys, by not saying the full truth, they make millions of dollars. They get all the ad money, all the hits, and everybody believes them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the guy, I was at Hoffa's murder. I was there. He's buried in my backyard. Okay. I was at the Oakland County kids as they died. They were thrown on my properties. They were chained next to me and murdered. I knew L. Brooks Patterson's family. All right. I'm never interviewed. The people that kidnapped me run the news. We didn't finish saying that. Anderson kidnapped me. Cooper kidnapped and raped my daughter on the farm that Donald Trump's tax, the people that do Donald Trump taxes in New York for his businesses, They rented me the home my daughter was kidnapped off of at 7 and raped by
Mazars. Yeah,
Cooper.
that's in the news now.
And then you got CNN, and then you got CNN is Anderson, who raped me, Cooper, who raped my daughter 20 years later, 360. 360 days a year, the people that raped me and my daughter are giving you news. Along with Osborne, who raped with Anderson, and Daryl Hall are giving you WJR and Channel 4 in Detroit. And every radio station, Tom Garrett at CBS. CBS gave you Kennedy coverage. Barbara Walters, Walter Cronkite. Tom Garrett was sending me Clinton's email on FDR hard drives, and then they murdered my wife on the Manning Ranch, and they murdered my attorney. The J.A. and Leah, Jaleayah Davis, J.A., Janet Bauman, her brother was murdered on my farm, and he was the attorney that was going to file my wife's murder charges with the district attorney, Mr. Slater or Slatery in Tennessee. He was murdered before he got there. And Tom Garrett at CBS in Obama's White House with his red line in the sand, as Heath and McCain are running against him, he helped Tom Garrett do it. Obama. And they're all covering for Bush. And Bush is covering for the presidents before him, for Clinton. And they're just passing the ball back and forth since they murdered Kennedy. And they got blinders pulled over your eyes, Greg. And everybody. And that calculator, it's working. It's pretty good. It's almost as accurate as me.
Yeah.
And I was around in 53 with murders all around
They're using that. Oh yeah, there's no question they're using gematria as part of their plan.
Yeah, no, no, everything they do is planned in a college.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The streets that mark people's murder before they're presidents are the people they frame, like Oswald. Oswald's walked into Ruby's gun. Oh, that's exit 357, Cheyenne. Cheyenne was played by Clint Walker. You know, and there's no denying the street exists. Go to the Continental Divide, it's Johnson Road. Go to Wyoming towards Michigan, 357 is Cheyenne, Wyoming. Cheyenne is my cousin, Clint Walker. Walker was with Oswald as Ruby shot him.
Right.
And, you know,
yeah, these are freaking
in
geniuses.
college before Kennedy.
This isn't your local Blue Lodge Mason people doing this. That when I go talk to them,
it's not the Masons doing this.
Right.
No.
They're not smart enough for the most part to do that. You know,
it's the Federal Reserve and the kings over in Europe doing this.
Yeah. People with old money, it's people with unlimited resources, it's people like that they can plan this sort of thing. This is not just
the Masons made everybody free.
Yeah.
We defeated our own cousin, King George. We told him to get the heck off the Delaware Bridge, gave you a declaration, and Thomas Jefferson is my family, Greg, through the Portwood family.
Right.
I can trace my history all the way back to Thomas Jefferson. He wrote it in France, come here, and you got your Declaration and your Bill of Rights. My family authored it. I think I know what I'm talking about.
Exactly. So to avoid disinformation in the future, we need to start focusing on who did these things and why they did them. And the best place you're going to learn this is by learning your story, because you're connected to so much.
That's absolutely right. And I'm not bragging, and I'm not trying to make any money. I hate my money.
Yeah, that's something people need to understand. I mean, you've already had money. They've already.
I don't need to make it in the music business. Right. I don't need to, Greg, I don't need to make it in the music business. My brother-in-law was writing the music that Elvis sang in Vegas the day I was born, Mitch Ryder. His real name's Bill LeVice. I went to school with him. He lived in my neighborhood. I was his paper boy and his brother-in-law. And I went to school and church with the Eagles. Mm-hmm. I know all these people, and I'm not trying to make money. Right. I'm a publisher with ASCAP and BMI since the 70s. I don't need to make it in the music industry. I'm already the boss of rock and roll.
Yeah, you already have.
I'm not trying to sell anybody anything.
Exactly. You have the same publisher license there that Michael Jackson had. So I mean, it's If there was a way for you to make money and the government wasn't going to take it, you'd already done it. It's obvious that you're not in this for the money.
Now,
You're out
Michael
to tell the
Jackson,
truth.
while I lived with the Jackson family, I lived with his cousin Audley, and he gave me a key to the house, Epstein's house, as I drove truck for Webb, Spider-Man. And this is all the way back in the 70s. And I don't need to make it. When Michael Jackson sold all his contracts to Japan, I never sold mine. George Bush and his friends, and Clinton and his friends, and Trump and his friends, they stole mine.
On 9/11 and
Right.
before. Yeah.
Before 9/11.
Yeah,
30
before
years
9/11 and buried
9/11.
it. Yeah, they buried it. They sealed the deal on 9/11. Yeah.
Right. They buried the receipts, and they buried any. My civil rights case was in the Pentagon that was blown up. I still have my copies. Anybody in the news, and I've been saying this for 20 years, Greg, anybody in the news could knock on my door and see my contracts.
Yeah. And
Nobody,
it's not like you don't put them on the internet. They can go on your Facebook page and see them.
yeah, you know I have Senate letters, and they all knew me as Huey Squire, owner of Bottom Line. But as soon as 9/11 happened, bam, Huey of Bottom Line in New York, he don't exist no more.
But Hugh, I'm going to end it here because I want people to actually be able to sit and absorb this. And if we go on too long, they won't. And plus, we're probably going to do this in the future here and maybe regularly get.
We should do these talks once a week, Greg. Every Monday, let's do one.
Sounds like a plan. So let's stop it
You like
here.
doing that? Because you're a really good, smart guy. I mean, you're smarter than any journalist I've ever known. In fact, I threw two journalists off my Facebook friend list because they know my wives were murdered, but they won't interview me until I write a book. And I'm not going to write a book because somebody murdered my wife.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. Nobody else in the country has to write a book because their wife was murdered.
Right. Right.
My wife's murdered. The people who murdered my wife, they need to go to jail, and the police need to do their job. And Attorney General Barr needs to do his job. And so does a District Attorney Slater
And that's what this is about.
Tennessee. They need
I got
to
a
do
dog
their
barking
job.
behind me too, Hugh. I think he's going to pee on my carpet here if I don't let him
What's it? Okay, go for it.
I'm gonna end it here, and we'll do it again next time.
Yeah, I'll see you next week. Have a good day.
See ya.